I would have had some concerns if you told me last week that Desmond Hart wouldn't be in the third episode of Dune Prophecy at all. The mysteries surrounding him are full of possibilities, while the mysteries around the Harkonnen sisters at the center of the story feel more like things we're being kept in the dark about. One is exciting and fun, and one can be frustrating, maybe more so if you've read some of the books these characters appear in. So as it turns out, answering some of those questions makes things a lot more interesting. And it's not just because we have a better idea about the motivations that led to Valya becoming the Mother Superior of the Sisterhood that will eventually be the Bene Gesserit. Tula's story turned out to be way more complicated, and the flashbacks to her time on Caladan were pretty good TV. I sort of knew what would happen, and it still felt dramatic and surprising. The details are different in the book, but this is a case where the show's version doesn't only seem better for adaptation purposes, but also is just a better version of the story. The episode opens where the last one left off. Valya and Theodosia are leaving the palace. The Mother Superior has been barred, and they need to act fast to maintain their hold on the great houses. Desmond's influence over the Emperor is a real problem, but it's not the first time an adversary has tried to remove her. She proclaims this soldier will learn like the others, but what's unsaid is that she has no idea what's happening with him, other than believing he's part of the prophecy. From there we go back in time to the whaling planet Lankavale, which we know the Harkonnens were banished to because of the Atreides fake news that her ancestor Abelard was a coward. As a young Valya goes to the market, we see one of the planet's Beyondax whales being harvested for its meat and fur. I don't know what the term whale fur does to someone who's never read any of the Frank Herbert books. For me, there's always been something unnatural about these two words together, and they come up so often in the Harkonnen storylines that it becomes a thing. Have we mentioned that our family is killing it in the whale fur game? What's that you say? Whale fur, huh? I don't know if the show is having some fun with that. I certainly thought it might be in the scene where her cousin showed up at the palace and started throwing whale furs around in his conversation with the Emperor. This is something that came from an almost throwaway line in the original book about how the Harkonnens emerged to be as powerful as they are in the original series. Then, every time their name comes up in the Son's books, you know something about whale fur is coming. It's not unimportant, though. This toiling in the cold over whale fur will pay off for the family. They'll eventually get rich again, regain some of their influence, and get control of the spice production on Arrakis. They'll leave this planet and establish their house seat on Giedi Prime when the main series again pits them against House Atreides. The flashback points out that things aren't great at home on Lankavale for young Tula and Valya in the show. Their mother seems overbearing and unpleasant, and also seems to wear the pants. The bright spot in an otherwise bleak existence is their brother Griffin. We don't have much time to get to know him, but the sisters light up every time they interact, which is very easy to pick up on. He's got a plan to go away to Zimia, the capital of Seleucia Secundus, because the Landsrat accepted a petition from the Harkonnen family. And his initial plan is just to try to get them a better trade deal. There's a lot of exposition in this exchange that could be important later. Valya's uncle is impressed with Griffin's determination and remarks that he wants to shove it in Vorian Atreides' face once he succeeds. Valya hears that name and brings up the family's chance to correct the record, the thing she brought up in the opening moments of the series when she was talking about history. And as far as what he says, the direct quote from Uncle Evgeny, who I should point out is played by Robert Baratheon himself, Mark Addy, is after doing God knows what, he's resurfaced, gallivanting around the capital. If I tried to explain all of this, all of the Vorian Atreides stuff that happens in the books, it would take a minute. And based on how things play out, it might not even be necessary. Still, by now you should be getting the point that the feud between houses Atreides and Harkonnen started 10,000 years before the events of Dune, and 100 and whatever number of years before the show's timeline. I'll get into the details related to Vorian's story when they're relevant, but what's important here is how this relates to Valya's motivations. These 6 episodes do appear to be the telling of her story, and after seeing her family life before she went to study with the Sisterhood, we understand how how important her brother was to her, the grievances she has with the rest of her family, and why she finds their current situation so unacceptable. In the conversation, she clarifies that the Harkonnen story about Abelard is that he wasn't a coward, but a hero who refused to commit genocide, which is mostly true. And then, like I've already said, things only get more complicated from there. The important thing here is she's not wrong to believe what she believes, and how that influences her actions. Griffin gives Tula the carved tooth that she'll pass on to Lila later, and we also learn that the first time Valya used the voice was to save his life when they were younger. They're bonded over this on top of everything else, and if she believes tracking down Wallach Atreides and getting him to take back his lies is that important, he's willing to do it. She assures him the Imperium will be better for their contribution, and he assures her that he knows they'll make it, and then smash cut to his dead body being returned home with his family there to mourn their loss. Valya wants none of that. She blames Vorian and wants his family to suffer like hers has. For that she'll have to wait though, because this is when her family decides to send her away to Wallach IX to study. Tula tells her the Sisterhood will help her, but she isn't ready to hear it. In the present day timeline, the sisters question whether Desmond might have survived his encounter with the worm. Is that a thing that could have really happened? And if so, could being touched by the Maker explain how he was able to resist the voice? So he's causing a stir. They're talking about him, but their loyalty is still there. Michaela brings her the message from Wallach IX about Lila not surviving the agony. Then she passes on Raquela's message about one born twice, in blood and in spice, which Valya immediately says refers to Desmond Hart, while wondering aloud if a trip home might be in order. There, Tula is watching over Lila, who isn't exactly dead. When Sister Avila brings a cup of spiced tea, she explains that no one has ever made a recovery from the state of limbo that Lila's in, though. Since this is a possible outcome, they have a plan in place to handle cases like this, i.e. take them off life support and let them go. But when Avila offers to step in and do that, Tula grabs her arm in a way that would make it hard to misunderstand how she feels, and tells her she'll deal with it herself when she's ready. After Avila leaves, she decides some spiced tea might be nice, and after she takes a sip and looks in the glass, she gets a different idea about what to do. Then she notices the carved tooth on the floor, and we're transported back in time to a memory from the planet Caladan. There's no text on the screen to point out that they're on the Atreides homeworld though. And while in the previous scene the implication is that she's going against things Valya put into place for personal reasons, her time with who we'll find out is Ori Atreides is something they cooked up together. As far as things play out, it's pretty straightforward. She gets close to him and he falls in love, only to learn too late that she has ulterior motives. The setup and execution are really well done, and the actor who plays the young Tula delivers a memorable performance to add another layer to the character. Also, if you haven't read ahead and know about the revenge subplot, I imagine the ending is a pretty big surprise. Not our sweet Tula, who has mostly come off as a counterbalance to Valya's undesirable tendencies. She delivered mercy to her lover's dying horse. She's not completely heartless, right? She also kills a lot of people with the help of that poison. And you might wonder if the kid she spares was the only member of the family that was left to rebuild the line. He's not, and honestly, I'm not sure who he'll turn out to be. Kieran Atreides is the rebel swordmaster in the present day timeline, but that takes place 30 years later. And the actor who plays him seems too young if that's what they were going for. He has a brace on his leg, which I presume kept him out of the hunt and alive, so that might be an important detail. You also might have wondered why Wallach Atreides is still around if he was a hero in a war that happened that long ago. His father, which is a whole other story, gave him a thinking machine-related life extension treatment that slowed down his aging and essentially made him immortal. He's been around for a long time, bouncing around and starting different families that he'll eventually outlive. Ori is a great-great-grandson from one of his marriages, and he has others from different wives spread out across the galaxy. Tula prepares to extinguish this part of his line by preparing the poison and adding it to a sort of war paint they applied during their hunting ritual, which they all take part in around the fire. Thinking her mission is accomplished, she returns to her quarters, where she finds Ori waiting. This doesn't seem to be part of the plan, and she encourages him to go out and join his family and effectively die. Looks like your family is really having a great time with the war paint and all of that. He's bummed about losing his horse and also super in love, and is exactly where he wants to be, which is a complication. I'm not saying it would have been easy to poison all these folks who were so warm and welcoming to her, but it gets considerably harder as her handsome young suitor says everything the young, overlooked Tula we've seen so far would want to hear. I mentioned that she already distributed the poison and watched his father start to smear it on his bare chest, yeah? There's no turning back on that part of the plan. And he just keeps pouring it on, so when he gets to the proposal, she says yes and just takes the opportunity to spend one night together as if it exists in an alternate reality where his family didn't kill her brother, considering that's all they'll ever have. Beyond the shock of the reveal that they're Atreides, that she only got close to him so that she could get revenge by killing them, and the reality of how good she was at doing it, the show constructs the tragedy by having everything she says to him be true, especially in the morning. At the same time, he counters with things she wouldn't expect to hear based on her shitty upbringing. He's offering everything she wants when she knows it's already off the table, with the high point being that he sees her, and then her flipping that on him before euthanizing him like his horse. She doesn't even extend him the same mercy either. She makes sure he sees what she did to his family, and that he knows why she did it. She sees one of the Seleucid bulls at the end. This is connected to House Atreides, which you see in the new opening credits and throughout various shots of their estate on Caladan before they relocate to Arrakis in the 2021 movie. These are native to Seleucus Secundus, but some were brought to Caladan and raised there. Paul Atreides' grandfather, Paulus Atreides, kept some around for bullfighting exhibitions and was killed by a bull when one of those went wrong. The symbolism there, down to the detail of them packing up the actual bull's mounted head that the book tells us still has Paulus's blood on its horns, relates to his son Duke Leto I walking into Arrakis in much the same way that he walked into the bull ring, and getting slain by the Harkonnens. They acted on behalf of the Emperor, who worried about Leto's popularity and thought he might become a rival for the throne who could unite the great houses against him. Tula's actions are tied to an obligation to family, to her sister specifically, because the bar might be really low, but Ori offered her something that sounded a whole lot better. This was after he got to know the real her, minus the murdering stuff, but he accepted her even after she revealed some things that make their match less viable, which transcended the feud altogether. It's hard to believe she went through with it, even for Valya when they reunite after the fact. And it's interesting because as that was all playing out, she was going through a sort of transformation herself. It happens off screen, but since Tula argued against an eye for an eye in the one conversation we saw them have, it's apparent that Valya set things in motion. It's also apparent that her quest for revenge comes close to preventing her from becoming a card-carrying member of the Sisterhood in the first place. The flashbacks to her early days on Wallach are still showing the beginnings of the Bene Gesserit order. According to Reverend Mother Rakella herself, the nascent Sisterhood works to advance the species. The human race is still evolving, and through training their bodies and minds, which we've seen them do, and acting as truthsayers, they can guide the powerful to shape the course of the Imperium. Coming from where she does, you can see why that would appeal to Valya, and why the hardships related to her family and the loss of Griffin would appeal to Rakella, who has a problem related to her chosen successor. We get a little more of Dorothea's story here and learn that Rakella's granddaughter wasn't always this annoying. She was sent to make inroads with the Butlerians and return to the Sisterhood a true believer. As far as what she tells the acolytes, she believes their purpose as a sisterhood is to exert a subtle influence and call humanity to its better nature. It's not all shouting out quotes from the Orange Catholic Bible all the time. Her zealotry would likely even be helpful if it weren't for that strict adherence to the Butlerian principles, which poses a real problem regarding the secret that Rakella lets Valya in on after they bond over her using the voice on the Mother Superior. In true Bene Gesserit fashion, there's more happening here than is immediately apparent. Valya takes the test and essentially fails. She uses the voice on Rakella, which gets her attention. Then she brings Valya into her inner circle and shows her that thinking machines make the breeding program possible. Voice aside, at that point, Valya is exactly what Dorothea calls her out for being. Scared, with no purpose and nothing to serve. Nowhere to put all that anger, to the point that she's just angry at everything. She wants revenge against Vorian Atreides and his family, but is also angry at her own family for not feeling the same way. She's fighting for their status, but doesn't much like any of them. And you can't really blame her. Still, the test she can't pass with the Sisterhood is humbling herself to commit to them. She can't get on board with the idea of devoting her one small lifetime to bettering all of humanity. Her intention was to be Griffin's truthsayer. That isn't going to happen. But all she's left with is what Dorothea laid out, resigning herself to an unremarkable life on a backwater planet. Rakella picks up on and focuses on this. In their initial exchange, she talks about how they found that adversity is the key to change, which is an idea that is built into the original Dune series. When she takes her to see the forbidden technology, she says they can use it to produce better rulers. They can influence generations to come and foster better leaders who are less prone to corruption and tyranny. Not to get off track too much, but I do think it's worth pointing out that this is not what they're trying to do with the breeding program 10,000 years later. By then, they'd already been trying to breed the Kwisatz Haderach for thousands of years. The male Bene Gesserit who could access all their ancestors' memories, including the masculine ones which the Reverend Mothers can't access. How that becomes their ultimate goal could be a question the show could answer. For now, the Mother Superior believes their cause of producing better leaders puts them above the law. Of course, thinking machines are dangerous, but we're responsible enough to use them without causing harm. She knows Dorothea will never accept this, so she needs to find someone she can trust with that part of her legacy. Someone that needs her as much as she needs them. When Valya gets to be on the inside, and on track to have some power within the organization, that's when she starts to take the Sisterhood seriously. Still, she can't take the Rossack poison and become a Reverend Mother when the opportunity is given to her. Mother Rakella already anticipated this, so after she reads Tula's letter, and though she doesn't know that they just wiped out a whole family, she knows they're up to something. At least I don't think she knows about that. She lets Valya leave with a dose of the poison, tells her to go home and handle her family business, and not return unless she survived the agony on her own and is returning as a Reverend Mother committed to the Sisterhood. After being reminded that her family still hates her, and even more so now after what Tula did, she's really out of options and decides to go through with it. She survives it, with Tula being the one who finds her. She comes out of it saying they have a new purpose now, because this is when she finds out that her sister will return to Wallach IX with her. The new purpose is to help see the Sisterhood's mission through, something that Tula hopes will be a fresh start, which all tracks, and this is how things conspired to put her on the path to becoming the Mother Superior. It just took a little prophecy and murder to get Dorothea out of the way to wrap things up. I find it interesting that Tula did the essential dirty work early, and that her use of the voice and Rakella's compromised position let her fail upward. But I'm sure that's something we'll come back around to before the series ends. In the present day timeline, her main priority is getting House Carino back under their control and handling the Desmond Hart situation. Things end on a cliffhanger when she visits her uncle, who, based on the introduction, we can assume she hasn't seen for quite some time. Possibly not since she left for Wallach IX. In the premiere, we did see her deny their request for a truthsayer for the 4th time, which leads me to believe that she'd step into that role and give them what they want to get back into the palace after getting barred. Her cousin, who opened the door, appeared earlier when he was dropping those whale fur anecdotes I mentioned. Given their history, I can't really think of anything else they could offer her here. There are more pressing issues on Wallach IX as the sisters gather to say goodbye to Lila. Emmeline and Jen voice opposing views, with the former saying it's fine, she's with her foremothers having a normal time, and the latter blaming Tula and not just calling her a liar, but emphasizing how low it was to prey on a child's desperation, knowing how much she wanted to know where she came from. And I'll add that this was a desperation they created by not telling her who her parents were in the first place. I said in my last video that I thought she was telling the truth, and that this wasn't a situation where she was doing what Jen just said, but listening to some of the interviews with the creators, I may have been wrong about that. Tula never really responds. Instead, Sister Avila swoops in to check the youngsters and get things back on track. I'm not exactly sure what she's referring to when she mentions sisters laying down their lives. Some things happen on Rossack in the books before they move to Wallach IX, but the show seems to have cut that part out. Either way, she tells them that Lila knew the risks and was willing to make the sacrifice, and it wasn't for nothing. Although even if it had been, Mother Valya wouldn't have asked her to do that if she didn't think it was necessary. And Avila doesn't know this, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because Tula has a secret plan to bring her back to life anyway. The episode ends with Tula going underground. We see that she's moved Lila's body into what looks like a medical apparatus, and we hear her issue commands to the thinking machine that they keep down there. She calls it Anarul, part of Raquela's last name, and tells it to administer enough spice to rejuvenate Lila's mind. There's a little pushback because it's Tula giving the order instead of Valya, but otherwise it sounds like something this machine can do. If nothing else, it does look impressive. It may be a little more than you might expect for a computer they need to maintain a database and crunch numbers on which families match better at any given time to further their project. Considering that the agony didn't work out as they hoped, you have to imagine she'll be revived. So the big question is, how will that turn out? People who've read the later Dune books know there are specific problems related to people who haven't had the training or matured enough to handle the other memory. And some of that has already been hinted at in the show, with Dorothea showing up and causing problems when she first took the poison. I would guess that's where things are heading, but I do wonder to what end. I guess this could just be how they discover this is a thing that happens. But then there's the angle that bringing her back by using spice also makes her seem like a candidate for who the prophecy is about. She's pretty much being reborn with spice. I still think it's more likely that they're misinterpreting that, and think if they decided it was Lila rather than Desmond, that would probably still be the case. So it'll be interesting to see how this changes things. In those cases, it's usually how people react to the prophecy that's important rather than the prophecy itself. Because that's pretty much it at this point. And something true with all prequels. We know how things play out later. What's interesting is how things fall into place to make them that way. We know the Bene Gesserit will only become more powerful. We know their focus will shift to producing the Kwisatz Haderach. And we know that Jessica's choice, one she made because of personal reasons, going against the idea of sisterhood above all, which is also the title of this episode, we know how that choice will profoundly change their plan and have far-reaching effects on everything. Going into this episode, I wasn't really sure what story about Valya the show was trying to tell, what it was trying to do by adding the prophecy, and what her story would tell us about the Bene Gesserit and how it connects to the big picture. I knew her motivations in the books because they tell you what they are, and I hoped the show would add something to that, which I feel more confident now that it's trying to do. There's this thread of what organizations say they do and how they actually operate. Things that characters do and need to believe to justify their actions, and how that all intersects. Halfway through the season, it feels like we're moving in a direction where we can start exploring some of that. This episode filled in some crucial gaps, so bring back Desmond Hart and let's get to it. I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.